Hello everyone, this is Mathfinder, the home for every math nerd's Pathfinder organization needs. If you're new here, welcome, and we're so glad to have you. If you've been here before, welcome back, and thank you so much for your continued support. Today, I am excited to share the Magus preview with you. The Magus is getting remastered in the upcoming book, Impossible Magic, and I believe a lot of folks were not sure of how much of a change the Magus would be receiving. Should we expect major changes, major balance adjustments, or will the Magus mostly get a slight facelift like some of the other classes got, like the Psychic? And I have some great news now that I have the preview ahead of time. It looks fantastic. There's a whole bunch of changes, so much more than I was expecting. Truly, I am really excited to share these with you, and there's a chance I missed something. I went through the PDF in as much detail as I could, and I have screenshotted all the relevant changes I found, but if I missed something, maybe y'all will find something in a few weeks. But I promise you, everything I say in this video is a huge and exciting change, so let's get right into it. Let's get started right away with the biggest possible change the Magus could have received that still made sense to have received. Some of you guessed this was coming, and kudos to you. I would never have reverse engineered that this change was coming just based on those little screenshots of the basic spellcasting feats. So kudos to everyone who guessed that. And it's true. It is not just a myth floating around on Reddit and Discord. The Magus now has psychic progression spellcasting. It used to have what was called bounded spellcasting. It has officially graduated to psychic-like spellcasting and necromancer-like spellcasting. Just a note here, I don't know anything about the summoner. I received a little trimmed version of the PDF that only contained the Magus and its respective focus spells. So I cannot tell you anything about whether the summoner also has this. My best educated guess is that it too will have graduated to 2-slot casting, but maybe it hasn't. So if we get a preview of that at some point, that'll verify it. Otherwise, you have to just wait till the book is out. But this is a genuinely huge change for the Magus. I cannot emphasize enough how big a change it is for them. Just think about it at a baseline. The Magus is the Spellstrike class. Usually speaking, it's encouraged that you spellstrike with your cantrips because your spell slots are precious. You only had 3 to 4 of them at any given level in the previous version of the Magus. This is no longer going to be true. As you level up, you're getting more and more and more spell slots, more than you know what to do with. When you're level 5, it's not gonna be a big issue for you to consider, maybe I just use Fear as part of my Spellstrike. Remember, Spellstrike has already been errata to work with save-based spells now. You don't have to use an attack. You can use debuffs. When you're level 10, you might start throwing a slow onto the boss, and as you get higher and higher in levels, you're gonna have more spells than you know what to do with. This means that your Spellstrike gameplay loop has already become much bigger. There is less reason than ever to care about getting a focus spell Spellstrike, because focus spell based Spellstrikes are going to increase your damage, of course, vertically compared to a cantrip, but they have always come at a cost. They make you worse at using conflux spells, and you sort of ignore part of your kit because now you're not really using save-based spell strikes. Now that you have so many slots to use on your save-based spell strikes, this problem goes away. You don't need focus spell strikes from an archetype anymore. You can just use your spell slots much more liberally without worrying that you're gonna run out if you use them on your spell strikes. And notably, once you get into higher level play, even a lower rank Horizon Thundersphere, like say one that is 2 below your maximum, is going to outperform a cantrip Spellstrike. So once you're in those really high level ranges of play, like level 13 to 20 or so, you can just Spellstrike with your lower rank spell slots. It's going to be way higher spike damage than you would have got from a cantrip. Not as high as Amped Imaginary Weapon, rest in peace Psychics, but it's still really good damage. You have less reason than ever to spend feats and focus points on focus spell strikes. And we'll talk about feats later because we got a lot of good feats as well as part of the remaster. And of course, spell slots do way more than amplify your spell strikes for you. There's other things you can do with spells. For example, melee Maguses have always somewhat consistently had the problem that on a larger map or in highly mobile battles, Movement is just sort of a tax on being a melee character, and that meant that Laughing Shadow was sort of the go-to melee subclass because of the fact that its conflict spell teleported you towards an enemy for free as part of recharging your spell strike and making a strike. But now you actually have the spell slots to use options like Blazing Dive or Dive and Breach or Blink Charge without it coming from like your 3 ever spell slots. Likewise, you actually have the slots to throw into your defense, things like Wooden Double and Hidebound and Zephyr Slip and Unexpected Transposition. All of these become more and more and more plentiful as you will level up. So this change is a huge change to the scaling of the Magus, and I really appreciate it because the Magus is actually great in low level play. Your spike damage drops enemies so fast that it's genuinely bordering on problematic. This change buffs Magus from level 5 onwards and massively buffs them in the level 11 plus range without overemphasizing their power in low level play. So fantastic change. Everyone should be happy about this except the Psychic, of course. Now let's get into the next major change to the Magus class chassis. Arcane Cascade has changed in a huge way. Let me put it up on the screen for you. Feel free to pause if you want to look at it carefully. Do you see the difference? It no longer has any requirements. You are not required to cast a spell or spell strike before you enter Arcane Cascade anymore. You simply use it and you enter the stance. The only benefit of casting a spell and then entering Arcane Cascade is that you can change the damage type from Force to something else. So right off the bat, there is a huge boost to usability. You can enter it just as an action. This action can be sequenced anywhere. You no longer have to figure out a time to enter it on an early turn if, say, you're a class that really likes Arcane Cascade, like Twisting Tree or Laughing Shadow, or just ignore it if you're a class that doesn't care for Arcane Cascade that much, like, say, Starlit Span. You enter it if it's good, and it just costs you one action, and you take that one action when it's good. This is fantastic. There is still a benefit to casting a spell before you enter Arcane Cascade, and that is the damage type change. But Force is a great damage type, so unless you're trying to trigger a very specific weakness, you're just gonna enter it as an action whenever you want and not worry about casting a spell first. And note here that they actually didn't just upgrade the usability of Arcane Cascade, they also added a feature. It gives you resistance to damage from spells. It's not a big amount of resistance, not on its own without any feats at least, but it is nice. It is going to come up sometimes and it is going to matter. It gives you yet another reason to enter the stance. And here is where I also wanted to talk about studious spells. So before, with the old-fashioned way of doing bounded casting for the Magus, studious spells was what gave you low-rank slots. You would get a couple of slots that you could only use on Gecko Grip, Haste, or Fly, and then your subclass would add a few other spells, like say Blur or something else. That is no longer the case for studious spells. That would be a redundant feature because you just have actual factual spell slots in those ranks now, right? What studious spells now does instead is if you cast one of these specific spells, Arcane Cascade becomes a free action to enter, not costing an action. So for example, if you have Haste as a studious spell because you're level 11, you cast Haste on yourself, enter Arcane Cascade as a free action, do something useful for your third action, and the next turn onwards, you just have 4 actions while already in the Arcane Cascade stance, and your Spellstrike is charged. Fantastic. And Haste is obviously a good studious spell every Magus gets, but plenty of other Maguses receive other good studious spells. Entangling Flora is on one of the studious spell lists. You'll see which one later in this video. And of course, Blur is on another one of them. So if you have any good spell, then starting at level 7, Arcane Cascade is often going to feel like a free action when you need it to, so long as you have a spell that's worth casting in that combat. Next, I wanted to talk about some minor Spellstrike changes. Emphasis on minor, they're not big changes. They didn't like remove the manipulate trait from Spellstrike, for example, but they're still meaningful changes. The big one is related to resistances. I have put the text of Spellstrike here. You could pause if you want to read it. It is pretty much unchanged from the already errata version we have. And likewise for the specific section later on. I believe the Spellstrike specifics now has more cleanup, but it works exactly the same way. The only difference now is that when you use it, the damage is combined for overcoming resistances / triggering weaknesses. Now, given that immunities, weaknesses, and resistances have already been errata, this is not a change from the weakness perspective at all. You can see the video discussing that errata linked above, but the gist is that if you made a spell strike with, say, ignition on top of already having a flaming rune on your weapon, you wouldn't do fire damage twice, you would still only do it the one time. And likewise, if the thing had two weaknesses and one was on a property rune, one was on the spell you struck with, you would trigger both, and that hasn't changed for Spellstrike. The only thing that this really changes is that when you run into a resistance, like say to fire, it's not going to double up against you because now all of your damage is combined as one. Maybe this is overall just a non-change because resistances were changed to work that way anyways, but it is a good clarity change. It was always a little weird that Spellstrike worked the other way. Then there is Double Spellstrike, your level 19 feature as a Magus, which I'm willing to bet you don't know what it currently does, because it was kind of a forgettable feature. What it currently does before Impossible Magic comes out is when you spell strike, you retain sort of like an echo of the spell. You can spell strike with it again sometime in the next minute. That's it. Not a great thing to have, it's alright. It effectively doubles the number of max rank slots you have if you're spell striking with them, but it was never that good an idea to spell strike with your max rank slots as a Magus, so sort of a wash for a level 19 feature. This is different. What you do is you cast 2 spells instead of 1, their combined rank must be 10 or less, and then their effects are combined on the creature you targeted with your spell strike. For example, you might combine a rank 3 slow and a rank 7 disintegrate, targeting the same enemy and absolutely ruin their day. Now, the frequency is once per day. The old version did not have a frequency, but personally, when it comes to level 19 features, I would much rather have a fantastic encounter-dominating once per day feature than have a subpar one that you can use many times in a day. So overall, I would say Double Spell Strike is a huge win for the Magus at level 19. And now that we're discussing the level 19 feature is what made me go back and double check. I guess the Magus has not fully graduated to psychic level spellcasting because they don't get a 10th rank spell slot. I guess that is still a gap between the bounded casters and the psychic and necromancer like casters. Very minor gap, but it is there. I just looked at the table again, and you can go back in the video and check it as well. You don't get a 10th rank slot as a Magus even now, despite otherwise having graduated to psychic like spellcasting. Now we can start talking about feat changes, and the first set of feats I wanted to talk about are the ones that key off of Arcane Cascade, and across the board, they have received buffs. Implicitly because Arcane Cascade is easier to enter and gives you more, and explicitly within their own text. First up, this is a brand new feat, Burning Cascade. When you use Arcane Cascade, each enemy in a 5-foot emanation takes some automatic damage. It's not a lot of automatic damage, but it is automatic, and it is free on an action you would otherwise have been planning to take anyways. And you can set this up. For example, let's say you are a slightly higher level Magus. You might Blazing Dive into the middle of enemies and immediately enter Arcane Cascade. Then each enemy that's immediately adjacent to you after your Blazing Dive will take some automatic damage. And that is all in all a pretty good turn to open with, right? You did an AoE to everyone and got into position for your next turn, which will presumably have some spell strikes. And then many of the other feats that key off of Arcane Cascade have gotten better. For example, Devastating Spell Strike has been changed that it now does what it used to do, deals a bit of damage in an emanation around the target, not including them, regardless of whether you're in Arcane Cascade or not. Previously, you needed to be in Arcane Cascade to do the damage. Now you just do the damage on Devastating Spell Strike, and if you're in Arcane Cascade, the damage is higher. Likewise for Distracting Spell Strike. Previously, it was honestly a bit of a confusing feat because it is a charisma-based option, fainting, on a chassis that requires strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, and wisdom. It's so hard to fit charisma onto a Magus, in my opinion. But this one gives you a status bonus to your deception check equal to your Arcane Cascade damage, which is fantastic. Now you might actually use this feint option. This is a pretty great way to set yourself up if you don't have another way of getting enemies off guard, which you might, because as the Laughing Shadow Magus, you're teleporting everywhere, and you might get to enemies that your friends have not yet gotten to. Now let's talk about some other notable feats, both changes and new ones. First up, there's Magus's Analysis. It does almost the same thing it used to do before, but it automatically recharges your Spellstrike. Previously, you had to actually succeed on your Recall Knowledge check to then recharge your Spellstrike. No longer the case. You just recharge your Spellstrike regardless of how the Recall Knowledge went. This is fantastic. I love the idea that Maguses are these nerdy fighters, basically, and unfortunately, some of the feats that represent that fantasy were not well fleshed out. This is enough. This little change already makes that nerdy fighter fantasy land pretty well. Now you will actually be using Recall Knowledge in combat because it gives you a nice advantage to do so. Then there is Running Recharge, and this is such a blessing for melee Maguses, because there's only 2 ranged subclasses for the Magus. Nope, I did not misspeak there. There are 2 ranged subclasses for the Magus, but the rest are all melee. And the issue with that is it's sometimes a little hard to do all the actions you want to do. Spellstrike is 2 actions. Recharging it is 1 action, either bespoke or as part of a conflict spell, depending on what you're trying to do with those focus points. And striding, something a lot of melee characters need to do, is 1 action, and that kind of sucks. It kind of pushes people towards the range subclasses. But now, with Running Recharge, it really helps any Magus who needs that help, and this is going to be fantastic. And that's also why melee Maguses, when they're not going for the range subclasses, feel pushed towards Laughing Shadow, because their conflict spell gives them mobility. This is going to be such a blessing for other Maguses that want to be in melee. I feel like Twisting Tree Maguses might be the ones that benefit the most from this one, and Sparkling Targe Magus is probably close behind, because both of these are Maguses that really care about their positioning and don't always have the actions to abuse their positioning well. So this is a great new feat. Then there is Spell Crash. This is also a new feat, and what it does is gives you an alternate way of making a pseudo Spellstrike. Rather than actually making a Spellstrike with a slot, you kind of throw it into the ground and create a small earthquake of damage, which is 1d10 per spell rank of the expended spell. And if you have the shove or trip traits, your AoE either knocks back or prones enemies that fail to save. This is a situationally decent option. It's fine for a level 6 feat, but do remember that it is competing with both Reactive Strike at level 6 and a lot of the subclass specific feats that you might want to pick at level 6 because your level 4 feat was spent on something like, say, Running Recharge. So I don't know if you'll end up picking this, but this was so cool that I wanted to mention it. Just the image is cool. If it included a strike as part of it, akin to just a regular spell strike, I feel like this would be such a fantastic feat, but as it is, it's a situationally good feat. It is a good way to offload spell slots that you prepared wrong for the day. And prepared spellcasters always appreciate having a spell sync of this sort, so it's definitely something to consider. And finally, at level 12, we get a fantastically cool and cinematic feat called Sprinting Spellstrike. For those of you who have watched the original Dragon Ball series, you know how Goku finishes the fight with Demon King Piccolo, where he fires a Kamehameha with his feet and then punches through King Piccolo? That is what this feat is. You fire a line spell, something like a lightning bolt, but rather than originating out of you, it propels you to then make a spell strike at the end of your movement. You're allowed to move through enemies during this, and you're allowed to use special movement speeds on it. And if you have expansive spell strike, once you're done propelling to your target and make your strike against them, everyone who was included in the line will then take damage as if you had done your lightning bolt along that line. Fantastic spell. I love it. And it sort of gives you another solution to the melee problem I was talking about, where sometimes you just don't have the actions for everything you want to do. Melee characters now have multiple solutions to this problem, At a baseline, having more spell slots means having more blazing dives and dive in breaches and blink charges, etc. Then you have the running recharge feat at level 4. And at level 12, you get sprinting Spellstrike, which is sort of like Blazing Dive, but on steroids, because instead of firing Blazing Dive, you're actually making a strike at the end of your movement and using a much stronger AoE along the way, like Lightning Bolt. All in all, I think the Magus really won out in what it received in this remaster. Now let's talk about the changes to the existing subclasses. And full disclosure, most of them are not bombastic. They're fairly minor changes. The big one is actually the lack of a change. Inexorable Iron received no actual explicit changes. Now, of course, it implicitly received a lot from the Arcane Cascade changes, from the spellcasting changes, and from feats like Devastating Spellstrike getting better, and things like Running Recharge and Sprinting Spellstrike making their lives easier. But the actual subclass itself unchanged, which is a little disappointing because I was hoping Thunderous Strike would be made a little bit better. Maybe scale a bit better, maybe start at a higher baseline damage, I don't know. But ultimately, it's fine. Inexorable Iron still will benefit from all of the changes discussed thus far. First among the changed subclasses is Starlit Span, which received two very nice changes. First, at 7th level, rather than getting Dark Vision as a studious spell, which is sort of a do-nothing, because it's so easy to access Dark Vision if you want it, now you get Telekinetic Maneuver, which is actually fantastic because Telekinetic Maneuver makes an attack roll. You can spell strike with it to determine the effects of your attack roll based on your strike rather than spell attack, which means now you can make a strike at range and trip your enemy. And of course, it being a studious spell means immediately after you can enter Arcane Cascade as a free action, which leaves your third action for something else. You could have, for example, used Sure Strike before using Telekinetic Maneuver Spell Strike, or you can use Force Fang right after to immediately recharge your Spell Strike. So this is a big change for the subclass. It's gonna make the subclass much better in play because of it being able to utilize these fundamental changes better than almost any other Magus in some ways. And now when you're in Arcane Cascade stance, your range attacks will ignore lesser cover your allies would grant your target. And as a reminder from my large creatures video that I'll link above, your allies are almost always only granting lesser cover to enemies. It's rarely ever going to be standard cover. So this is great. You're ignoring cover. All of you who want to stand still and play a Spellstrike turret, your turreting life got even easier. I will say Starlit Span Magus should become much less repetitive now that you have actual spell slots to strike with. You can, for example, use Telekinetic Maneuver for a wide variety of riders from your lower rank spell slots. You don't need to heighten it like you would an attack spell. And you can apply a whole range of debuffs at range. Honestly, the spellcasting changes are going to increase the variety for every single Magus so much. Next up, there is Twisting Tree. Twisting Tree also got a change. This one is a nerf, actually. Rather than getting a free action interact with every strike you make, you now get once per round a free action interact. Ultimately, this is a healthy change because it helps with tracking burden in play and it helps with avoiding the potential of ballooning out with the action economy, but it sucks for the people who enjoyed this fantasy. And finally, you're not gonna believe this buff. Dimensional Assault. Do you see the buff? Don't read the text of the spell, look at the heightened. It heightens at 5th rank, so level 9, to just be your whole speed. This is insane. I don't know who thought Dimensional Assault needed a buff. Maybe the designers were worried that because the other Maguses, the other melee Maguses are getting so many quality of life improvements, the Laughing Shadow Magus will feel behind. I don't think it needed the buff. It got one anyways. You can teleport your full speed starting level 9. That is so fantastic for anyone who enjoys playing the Laughing Shadow Magus. And honestly, at least it's a really cool change. It's definitely imbalanced in my opinion, but I won't fault them for making a cool change like this one. And that's it for the video. There's nothing left to talk about. Certainly, I was just hallucinating when I said there's 2 ranged subclasses for the Magus, not just 1, and I kept pluralizing it throughout this video, right? Nope, I actually have 2 new brand new subclasses to show you. So let's talk about the Volatile Spark subclass, the brand new ranged subclass for the Magus. This subclass is built around using firearms, presumably with the reload trait. And this is great. I have tried building a gun-toting Magus before. I can assure you it was a terrible experience. I did not even end up taking it to play because just from the theory crafting, I could tell that this was an impossibly hard thing to do. And this subclass fixes your issues and does so in a way that does not just power creep the way of the Spellshot Gunslinger. The Spellshot still has good reasons to be played, it's just you now have another way of doing this. So this is the text of the subclass. At a baseline, it gives you the ability to use Spellstrike as part of your firearm strikes, and gives you a nice passive benefit if your firearm has the concussive trait. Now, unlike other subclasses which give you a passive benefit alongside Arcane Cascade's built-in passive benefits, like say Laughing Shadow increasing the damage, or Inexorable Iron giving you temp HP, or Starlit Span now letting you ignore lesser cover from your allies, this one gives you a free reload action when you enter Arcane Cascade. And this is only going to happen once a combat, so really you're only reloading once in the combat for free, otherwise you're using the actual factual reload action, but once is enough. Spellstrikes deal so much damage that having just this one extra bit of compression is going to make the difference for when you really want high spike damage. And this is also why I said it does not power creep the Spellshot Gunslinger, because you don't get reload compression as much as any other Gunslinger does, but your Spellstrike action is obviously better than Spellwoven Shot that the Gunslinger gets. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that, ultimately just another cool way of gishing it up with a gun. Your initial Studious spell is Entangling Flora, which is obviously a good spell to open combats with, but one, you're not really going to Spellstrike with Entangling Flora ever, I think. And two, if you just cast Entangling Flora to open the combat, there's no real benefit to entering Arcane Cascade right away. It's better to just not enter Arcane Cascade, make a strike right now, and then on a later turn, reload for free while entering Arcane Cascade. So it doesn't really make that much of a difference what you have as your Studious spells. This class is even more of a turret than the Starlit Span Magus. This one is probably going to focus entirely on spike damage, and because it's using firearms, it's going to perform exceptionally well if you're able to crit fish. For example, if you have a bard or commander supporting you in these actions. And you get a pretty nice conflict spell too. You make a ranged firearm strike, and any enemy in a 20-foot emanation around you makes a will save to be frightened. This is a pretty good effect to have. It will make your positioning a little challenging. 20 foot is not that big for a firearm user, but it's not the biggest deal. And ultimately, every ranged Magus can make good use of Force Fang if they don't want to use their subclass's conflict spell. Now every, or is it almost every, I think some of the uncommon ones don't, but every Magus, as far as I know, gets a level 4 subclass feat and a level 10 subclass feat. So what do those look like for Volatile Spark? At level 4, you get Exploding Bullet. This essentially lets you reload your weapon with a mystical piece of ammunition rather than a physical one, and it will either give your weapon the Scatter 5 trait, or if it already had a Scatter trait, it will increase the damage you do as part of the splash. This is not a bad feat to have. This is a good way to sequence around your turns. Think about it. On your opening turn, you might just enter Arcane Cascade, make a Spellstrike to do a bunch of damage. On turn 2, you might move to a bit closer position, then reload and use Booming Blast. This way you will fear a bunch of enemies while also getting back your Spellstrike. And the next turn, you might use Exploding Bullet followed by Spellstrike. You're able to sequence your turns well enough between all of these reload plus actions that you're not gonna feel like the brunt of how bad the reload action economy can get, but obviously you're not having it as good as a gunslinger. And at level 10, you get Killshot's Report. If you drop an enemy to 0 HP with a Spellstrike, then as a reaction, you can cleave the extra damage from the Spellstrike onto an enemy within 10 feet. Pretty nice option to have. ultimately, I think this one is just going to get outshined by Expansive Spellstrike. I would much rather just fireball where my enemy is and hit everyone around them, rather than potentially carry damage over to one who's only within 10 feet right after the first one dropped to 0 HP. So niche feat, I don't know if I would pick it if I were building this Magus, but it's cool for sure. Overall, I love this subclass. This might be the next Magus I play, and that sucks because I want to play so many other Maguses, but this might just have to be the next one. And finally, I want to talk about a subclass, which is Paizo listening to all of y'all's prayers. There is now a dual-wielding Magus subclass, the Twofold Tine. The way it works is this. While already in Arcane Cascade stance, if you make a strike with a melee weapon you're holding, then the other hand's melee weapon, for example an agile offhand weapon that you're wielding, will get additional Arcane Cascade damage until the end of your next turn. This is pretty nice. It's definitely not the best Arcane Cascade bonus, but ultimately all a dual-wielding subclass needs to do is encourage you to dual wield, and it does do this, and the damage bonus is nice. And as you see with the rest of their toolkit, it does interface neatly with what they have. I'll also note here that your 7th level Studious spell is Blur, which is going to be a nice way to enter Arcane Cascade. Your Conflux spell, Force Fling, not to be confused with Force Fang, is one where you make a melee strike except it increases your reach to 15 feet, changes damage to Force, and reduces multiple attack penalty if you're targeting somebody whom you haven't already struck on this turn. This is, as far as conflict spells go, mediocre. It might actually even be weaker than Thunderous Strike, depending on your perspective. But given that you're going to be using this alongside some extra damage, it's not bad. And what you'll see here is that your Arcane Cascade bonus, combined with the way Force Fling works, encourages you to use your 2 weapons on 2 separate turns. So for example, on the first turn where I make a strike, I might spell strike with my main weapon. And then on the next turn, I might use Force Fling plus a second strike with a second weapon that is agile. And if there's another enemy that's just a little out of reach, I might first make a strike to the one nearer to me, and then Force Fling to the one further away, and that way I have a lower multiple attack penalty as well. Both of these strikes will have higher damage because of the intensification that my first strike gave me from that previous turn, which is lasting until the end of this turn. And then these strikes will then intensify the next strike I make with the main weapon on my third turn. And this alternating sequence is what the subclass is about. I think they did a good job of encouraging you to actually care about dual wielding with the subclass. What about the feats? Well, at level 4, you get the Recharging Flurry, which I think is a fantastic feat. You make one strike with your main weapon, it will increase the damage on your other one if you're in Arcane Cascade, which then you will make an attack with. You will have multiple attack penalty as normal, unless you're attacking different enemies, in which case the second attack is reduced, and then you will recharge your spell strike, regardless of whether those strikes hit or not. This is pretty fantastic. Recharging as part of a mini, not as good double slice is just really good on this Magus and gives you another reason to really like dual wielding. And while we're on the topic of this recharge, I want to note that recharging via things that are not conflux spells has actually become really powerful for Maguses. So remember near the beginning of the video where I said that I didn't used to be a believer in focus spell strikes because why would I spend my focus points on something like Imaginary Weapon when I can use those focus points on Force Fang to maplessly recharge my spell strike? I never really thought it was worth going for that poach, even though I know that a good chunk of the optimization community swears by it. Well, now with all these feats, it is worth it. So if you're spending the feats to, say, get Recharging Flurry, Magus' Analysis, or the running recharge option, well, it's also worth spending some feats to try and get something like Fire Ray or Winter Bolt to spell strike with, because now you're gonna have the focus points to spare. You're not relying on conflux spells to make recharge action neutral or action positive. You can do it via your feats. And ultimately, whether you want to recharge plainly via your conflux spells, or if you want to do it via one of these feats and then save your focus points for using a spell strike that you poached from another class, is going to depend on the quality of your conflict spell itself. For example, if I'm a Sparkling Targe Magus, I see no reason to ever spend focus points on something like Fire Ray. My conflict spell makes recharge not just action neutral, but significantly action positive. There is no real reason to ever consider using the focus point on a spell strike, in my opinion. Likewise for the gun subclass I just showed you, where your conflict spell is also going to frighten enemies. It's a pretty good debuff, and you might as well use it rather than spending focus points on something from outside your class. But the ones where the conflict spell is not that good at a baseline, you are going to maybe consider these external ways of spending your focus points while recharging via these feats that don't cost focus points, especially in a case like recharging Flurry, where it fits so unconditionally and generically into your action rotation. And finally, Split Spellstrike. It's a level 10 feat that lets you make 2 strikes and make both of them suffer from the effects of the spell strike, so long as the spell was one that could have targeted 2 creatures or had an area. This is a pretty good feat. You could put a debuff on 2 enemies while striking them both, or you can just use a plain old damaging spell strike on both of them, so long as you're able to target both the enemies with it. And notably, if you use one of the save-based spell strikes, the multiple attack penalty matters a lot less, because they will still have to save against it if you don't critically fail, even if you miss. So this subclass has a lot of reason to consider save-based spell strikes as well. So that'll be all for today's video, folks. I hope you enjoyed this preview. I am so excited to play and test the new Magus whenever I get a chance. It might be the first class I play the next time I get a chance to play a character, hopefully in a long-term campaign, not just for a one-shot. I really want to see how this character plays from a lower level into high-level play, how having access to so many more spells changes my decisions on a day-by-day basis. I was not expecting this magnitude of changes for any class in the remaster. I think the Magus might be the single most changed class in the remaster, beating the Oracle, beating the Witch and Swashbuckler. It's got so much heft to what we got, and I can't wait to try it out. If you like this video, please like and comment. If you'd like to see my upcoming videos, please subscribe and click the channel notifications button. Every little bit of engagement helps this channel grow, and every bit of channel growth helps me get out the content of the quality I want to all of you. If you'd like to directly support me, consider joining a channel membership. Regardless, I hope I'll see y'all next time. Mathfinder out.